Hey there. Pastor Rob here. I'm here today with a friend of mine and someone that at least a few people at Sunny Slope will probably recognize. This is Scot Bruce. Scott is a professor over at Corban. I'll actually let you introduce yourself in a second, but let me kind of set the stage for what I think we're going to do today. It's the Oscars are coming up in the next few weeks, and so there's all kinds of buzz about the latest movies that are out and which movies are good and which movies are not so good. And Scott and I were having a conversation about this, and we thought it'd be fun to kind of let everybody listen in on it. Essentially, we kind of started talking about the question: which movies can or should Christians be interested in? Are there movies that Christians shouldn't watch? Are there movies that Christians really should gravitate more towards? How do we as Christians approach movies, and how do we evaluate them? What makes for a good movie? And so that's a really, really broad topic, obviously, but Scott's kind of an expert in this, and so we're really fortunate to have him here. So I'm actually, why don't you start by just kind of telling us a little bit about yourself and maybe your credentials, and then we'll just
Sure.
kind of take it from there.
So I'm a professor of history and humanities out at Corban University. So I teach a bunch in the history curriculum with world and American history. But I also teach a number of philosophy and worldview courses at the university. And so over the past decade, that has come to include some film classes, and I do a lot of integration with worldview and film, and how we watch films through a more mature lens. And so yeah, so that's my gig out at Corban, and I'm finishing my 18th year there. In fact, yesterday was the 18th anniversary of my interview for my job out at Corban, March the 6th of 2006. So
that's kind of cool because our times in Salem kind of track almost
mhm,
exactly. I interviewed in July here, but
mhm,
yeah, anyway, so that's kind of cool.
mhm.
Um, so Corban is a Christian university here in Salem, and there are some people that would hear kind of what you just said. You talked about Christian university and films and movies, and you teach about different movies. And we've kind of talked about some of the movies that you have your students watch. There are some people that would probably look at that and say, well, I'm not so sure how well those two things fit together, right? So, should Christians be watching Hollywood movies? Should Christians be watching whatever, Silence of the Lambs, or
Right,
those kinds of
right,
movies because they have violence and language and swearing and
sure.
nudity and all that stuff. So, let's start there. Should Christians be watching mainstream Hollywood movies?
Okay, yeah, it's one of the essentials. So I'm gonna put this on the screen for a second. This is a book by a friend of mine named Brian Gottawa, published by IVP InterVarsity Press, which is a Christian press. And the title is Hollywood Worldviews, and the subtitle is Watching Films with Wisdom and Discernment. And I use this in my various film classes that I teach. And I love what Brian Gottawa does because he allows us to take a bit more of a mature approach to these topics. I'm gonna try to walk on eggshells a little bit here. This is a topic that comes up a lot
Yeah.
with evangelical Christian families. And I've given presentations. I don't just teach at the university. I've gone around and given presentations to evangelicals, and so not just college students, adults attend these presentations, and so I have had a lot of interaction. And one of the most consistent things that comes up is this idea that, you know what, if we're Bible believing Christians, if we're serious about our faith, then a bunch of movies are off limits. Like we can't as good followers of Christ, as devoted followers of Christ, allow ourselves to watch a pretty wide array of movies. And oftentimes, that spins in a number of directions, but it would include the idea being that, hey, if a film is PG-13 or rated R, then probably off limits for the evangelical Christian, for the devout Christian. or if the film contains any, any semblance of language, any semblance of violence, or a depiction of depraved human,
Mm.
depraved human behavior, then all bets are off, right? And so it's time to go back and watch Pixar films for the rest of your life. So I think we have to push back against that mentality a little bit. I mean, I can go down a long string of thought here, but what's your basic orientation? And I'll probably follow that up with
Yeah.
some more comments.
Well, so let's start with this. Let's start with the viewpoint that says, Christians will benefit most from watching movies that are with an explicit Christian message,
Mhm.
right? And so there are production companies that have put out movies that they have a very clear Christian message and morality and theme, and they're almost movies that are almost meant to try to, in a way, present the gospel or show what the gospel would look like when lived out, say, in married life or family, or in a more secular culture. And so these movies are, and I'm sort of hesitant to name some of them because I'm with you. I don't want to step on toes and necessarily target people who actually find value in those, but I also know there's a lot of people that say those are the movies that they advance the kingdom of God, they advance the message of the gospel. So those are really where we should focus our attention. So let's start with that. What's wrong with that approach?
Okay. I will I'll be the bad guy here.
You could be the
So
bad guy, yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to avoid at least mentioning some films in passing, but I think I'll start with this. I think we need to first identify what filmmaking is. Filmmaking is an art form, and when we talk about the ways that really good art is put together, that good artists approach their work, there are things we look for. We look for, whether it's a painter or a musician or a filmmaker. In this case, we look for high art. I mean, we look for a level of complexity and authenticity and expert skill set that is being displayed. So it's one of the reasons that you can pretty quickly tell the difference between an expert filmmaker, like, we could throw a bunch out, Terrence Malick or Martin Scorsese or Christopher Nolan or whoever it is. These people are geniuses in their expressions of art. And every bit as much, I would argue, as some of the great painters of the Renaissance, whether it's Da Vinci or Michelangelo or whoever we're talking about. So art is a multi-tiered, multi-tiered entertainment piece, career orientation, and I think we have to acknowledge that the devotion to the art form would include, in film, it would include expert screenplay writing. It would include, so the narrative has to be very carefully structured and put together. The cinematography is crucial. The editing process is also really critical. And when you bring all that together in an expert formation, it really jumps off the screen at you. I think one of the big pieces of this is authenticity. So here's what I would say. The temptation for many evangelicals, and I get the temptation. I was raised in an evangelical home, but my father was a professor of biochemistry at Oxford and Wheaton College. I think he understood art and entertainment in some more, I think, complex ways, which helped me out. It was a good place to grow up and think about this. So for me, one of the approaches I would take is when I'm giving these talks, I will get some pushback from some of the stuff I'm saying, and typically it revolves around this. Hey, if it's rated R, PG-13, as I said, anything with those ratings makes me nervous, because whatever the content is in the film is likely to be challenging, right?
And challenging meaning sort of mature content, maybe in some moral gray
Right,
area.
moral gray area. People behaving badly,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
Yep.
The human
Okay.
beings behaving how human beings tend to behave
Yeah.
in our
Yep.
world. And so, unless a film is like, I don't know, Chariots of Fire or whatever, something that's just so obviously uplifting and it's a depiction of sound, virtuous character on the part of the, Eric Liddell in that
Hmm.
film
Hmm.
and Harold Abrahams. So unless it's a film like that, that's uplifting and doesn't have profanity, doesn't have any sort of sexual content or violence or bad language, then maybe we should be avoiding these. Over the past decade, when I give these talks, I'm pretty constantly surprised by some of the
Hmm.
commentary I receive. And the one guy at one of my presentations said, "Hey, um, I I I really think that what you presented here is dangerous." And
Mm.
he's like, if I can't watch a movie with my 9-year-old, my 8 or my 9-year-old, then I shouldn't be watching it. And I dealt with the comment with some kid gloves. I mean, I was careful, but it was a pretty telling remark. And
Mhm.
I've heard some similar expressions over the years.
Mhm.
So, getting to your point, getting to your question, I think we fool ourselves into believing that there's only a certain brand of film that we're allowed to watch with a certain overt Christian messaging, that is geared toward evangelism. Like, so if that's the film's primary purpose. Now, if evangelism is a product, is a symptom perhaps of the film,
Mhm.
so much the better. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But filmmaking is art.
Right.
And what we want to avoid with an art form like film is cliche. And we want to avoid inauthenticity, right? We want to avoid things that are not authentic. Um,
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could give an example of that, because it strikes me that, just in my own experience, that's been one of the difficulties, I guess, that I've had with some of these more
sure,
explicitly Christian
sure,
films. What is it that strikes you as so problematic about those
sure.
I mean, I've got my own thoughts, but
No,
I'm
no,
curious your.
so yeah, putting me on the firing line, I see. Okay,
We're
I'm
both
gonna,
kind of like dancing around who's going to name the
so,
Christian film
so
first.
I have a younger, not young, but he's in his, no, he's in his, see, I'm 52 now, so anybody who's under the age of 50 is a youngster. Guy's been graduated from Wheaton, probably 15 years ago now, I guess. His name's Brett McCracken, and he's been writing for first the Gospel Coalition.
Mhm.
Now he's doing more independent work. And one of the things that he does is film reviews, and does it through a very careful worldview lens.
Mhm.
And here's something that he wrote that I thought was really valuable. He wrote this. He says, if Christians are portrayed in film, it's usually as right-wing zealots or scary Pentecostals, or faith is reduced to schmaltzy simplicity.
Mhm.
Now, this is a reference to faith-based films, right?
Mhm.
So the reference that we would be making here is those that are specifically oriented around issues of, faltering faith or trying to explain what a good Christian should be, whatever
Yeah.
the case may be. So that's what he's referencing. So faith is reduced to schmaltzy simplicity, as in most so-called Christian films of recent years. And he goes down. There's a list of those. I'm just going to name a few. The list would actually be, it's growing by the week and the month. Left Behind from 2000, Facing the Giants from 2006. The Kendrick brothers are all over this kind of a list. Fireproof, Courageous, God's Not Dead. There would be, I mean, we could keep going.
Yeah.
These are the
Yeah. Yeah.
films he's referencing. And he does continue further. He says, it's not that making films that try to address the issues that they're attempting to deal with, it's not that those orientations are necessarily wrong, but But what they've created in these cases are films that are, as he said, I think, schmaltz in nature, which is to say
Yeah.
they're very cliched. They're organized around the concept of resolving issues in life in a very specific sequence that's almost always the same.
Yeah. Well, that's I'm glad you said that, because that was one of the things kind of going through my mind, and that I wanted to just kind of bounce off of you, and maybe you can react to this, or tell me I'm wrong, but it seems that they all follow basically, maybe not all of them, but many of them follow a very similar storyline,
Mhm.
which is something to the effect of you have a Christian and a non-Christian, or group of Christians and non-Christians, and things go badly for the non-Christian until they become a Christian, and then things go better for them.
Right.
Like they're all, it strikes me that they're often variations on a theme similar to that.
Sure.
And so and if then the effect is that it can become at least the thinking is that it becomes an evangelistic tool, which is,
Right. Right.
if you're in the non-Christian camp, hey, become a Christian and your marriage
Yeah.
gets better, your sports team wins, and you won't be left behind.
Right.
So what do you, I mean, am I accurate or
No,
inaccurate, or what do you think?
I think that's well said. I really can't say it any better. I mean, so you're either dealing with a non-Christian character, or you're dealing with a Christian who has fallen a bit, right?
Right.
Who has
Yeah.
fallen
Yeah.
off the Christian pedestal a bit. That would be true with the film, the Kirk Cameron vehicle, Fireproof, right? Um, so, and I want the viewers who are watching this to understand that the goal here is not to pick on the Kendrick brothers or Kirk Cameron or whoever
Sure.
it is. I think their hearts are almost assuredly in the right place, and they're trying to create entertainment that is meaningful and that can be watched by Christian families. The question is this real art? I think it is a lesser art form, is probably the way I would put it. So I laud their intentions, but I'm
So
not
how
really.
is it then a lesser art form? That's an interesting evaluation.
Well,
Because one of the things you said a couple of minutes ago is that art can there's all these different aspects. There's,
right.
cinematography, and there's writing, and there's directing and music, and all that comes together. So can these Christian, is it just that these films are of lesser quality? Is
Yeah.
that the message is not as nuanced, or
Right.
what is it?
Well, it's all of the above. So one of the dads, one of the gentlemen at one of my presentations brought up Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. And so Philippians 4, it is talking about how we live authentic and sound and devoted Christian lives, and we're to be thinking about things which are pure, and thinking about living lives that are, in proper devotion to Christ and all the rest. And so he quoted the verse to me, and I listened, and at the end of it, I said that you left out, sir, you left out one thing. You left out truth.
Yeah. Okay.
And so one of the things I think I see with, Kendrick Brothers films and some of these others is not only do they tend to be cliched, right? Not only are they're just actually devoting themselves to cliche. That's not high art. Anytime you're dealing in cliche, you've kind of fallen off the high art pursuit a little bit.
Right.
But I also think that there is a lack of authenticity, in the sense that, look, human beings, all of us experience life in a wide array of ways, and people around us do the same. And life is challenging in this world, and films that are geared toward inspiration and affirmation of character, they have value.
Yep.
I mean, I mentioned Chariots of Fire, but we could throw in a faith-based film, even like Ben-Hur from 1959, not the remake, which is horrible, the recent remake, but 1959 with Charlton Heston, William Wyler piece. So these are affirming films. They show off people who are battling against all sorts of challenges and obstacles, and retain their character and stay devoted, and they're inspirational in that way. So that's a mode of truth.
Yeah.
But if we flip it around, I think it's important to remember there are a lot of things to be learned by being reminded of what human depravity looks like, and what challenge in life does often look like for people. And in a sense, you're taking a film like that becomes sort of a morality play. right?
Yeah.
And so you're able to see, man, this character's messed up, and they don't appear to be coming out of this challenge well.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just keep making poor decision after poor decision after poor decision, and or you're something that reveals the deep inherent evil that runs rampant in sociopaths in our world, for instance, or whatever it is.
Right.
I think there is some value in contending with that, because that is a revelation of the ways in which human beings experience life in a truthful way.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that, because that was a question that came up a few minutes ago when you talked about, human depravity. What is the benefit in grappling with that? Because if you think, I watched a few weeks ago, I watched Road to Perdition, which is, very violent. It's full of language, but
Mhm.
it was a very, very good movie. And one
Mhm.
of the things that struck me is that it explores the nature of how, so they wouldn't use this terminology in the movie, but from a Christian vantage point, it actually illustrates the sort of the progressive nature of sin.
Mhm.
And then how do what is the redemptive answer? So,
Sure.
so maybe say a little bit more about the benefit and the value in watching movies that tell the truth, even if that truth is about stuff that we may not want to face.
Well, I think it might help us to start with asking a question about why we read passages of scripture
Yeah.
that
If
that
you
are
didn't
not
go there, I was going to go
that are
there.
not
Right. That,
shining some sort of a light.
yeah.
That scripture does not exist as a Thomas Kincaid painting. Uh,
Yeah.
we see inspiration, we see joy, we see celebration of life, we see people who are virtuous characters that never fall away. Someone like Job obviously stands out.
Mhm.
But it doesn't take you long to read through either the Old or New Testament before you begin to encounter severe depravity.
Yeah. Right.
Reading through the book of Judges is not a pleasant
It's not for the faint of heart.
experience, and not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
There's a lot of betrayal, violence, murder,
Yeah.
sexual hedonism, and it's off the charts. Now, do reading those passages somehow undermine our humanity or undermine our faith? I sure hope not.
Yeah.
I think
Right.
they are lessons, they're reminders for us. So I think there's a similar application. And I'll get to road. You bring up Road to Perdition, knowing
Mhm.
that it's one of my
Yeah.
favorites. I think it's a masterpiece. In
Yeah.
fact,
It's fantastic.
so I think I'll set this up in this way. Um, Going back to the multi-layered elements of filmmaking, I think for the Christian, I love what Brian Godawa says. So once again, I'm referencing some stuff from Hollywood Worldviews by Brian Godawa. He differentiates. He kind of divides the viewer, Christian viewers in particular, into two categories. He calls them cultural gluttons
Hmm.
and cultural anorexics.
Hmm.
The cultural glutton is one who just watches anything and everything without a critical lens.
Right.
So they're just a passive participant, and for them, watching movies is pure entertainment, nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's a consumerist thing,
right,
right?
they're
You're
just sitting there
taking it
consuming
in,
whatever it
yeah,
is, and
with
and
uncritically,
right,
and yeah,
and it infiltrates their heart and their mind, perhaps in ways they don't quite understand.
yeah.
That's obviously not a healthy approach. There are, and
So before you get to cultural anorexics, maybe let's say what is the danger of being a cultural glutton? Does
sure.
the stuff begin to form you? Does it
Sure.
you pick up or what?
Sure. I mean, one of the things, you can't be around Gen Zers very long before you realize you're reminded of how hard it was for us. I'm Gen X, as I think you
Mhm.
are. Millennials, Gen Zers now. Uh, they take in an awful lot.
Mhm.
We've all
Yeah.
done this, and we do have to guard our hearts and minds and be aware of what we're consuming. The danger, of course, becomes that we start to think and act in ways that are not biblical, because the influence of what we read and what we listen to and what we watch is actually pretty profound.
Yeah. It affects us probably more than we realize if we are cultural gluttons.
Right.
I mean, we begin to, it's not so much, I would say, it's not so much the danger is, well, you're going to start swearing. I mean, you might, but actually, I think it's more subtle than that. I mean,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it begins to form your sense of right and wrong.
Mhm.
It begins to form your sense of meaning and purpose in life. And that happens more subconsciously. And so there is that risk. If you're just watching media just to consume it, there is that risk
Mhm.
that you become formed by the media and it has this effect on you that you don't really realize if you're just a glutton.
I agree. So, I mean, that is one extreme that
Mhm.
you want to avoid. The other extreme, however, is like, and I would just say it's equally damaging. That's probably
Mhm.
the way I would put it, because the cultural anorexic views all forms of culture, entertainment, whatever it is, music, movies, television, and visual art in a variety of ways. It views it all through a lens of paranoia and fear.
Mm.
If I partake in this realm, my faith will be undermined. I will be a lesser Christian. I won't be able to handle it. It will, uh, I won't be serving
Right,
Christ in the ways
right,
that I
right.
should. And so the idea becomes that if a film has an R rating or a PG-13 rating, well, oh no, if I watch said film, um, in this false hierarchy in their mind, the belief is, Jesus might not love me as much,
Right,
right?
right, right.
Um, and moreover, I think there's this tendency then to think of all these forms of entertainment as danger zones, as just pure danger that's
Right.
to be avoided, and that does a lot of damage. For starters, um, we are not. Romans 12 verses 1 and 2 says we
Mhm.
are not to, essentially we're not to capitulate, right?
Right,
So we're to guard our hearts and minds, but we are called to be a part of this culture. We
right,
are called to engage,
right,
right?
right.
We don't have to become the culture, but we have to engage it.
Yeah, and that's where like that's I think a really critical point because in the Reformed tradition, that's long been kind of one of the fundamental ideas is that we don't isolate from culture,
Right,
we don't acclimate to it,
right.
but we find a way to be a part of it in a way that is maybe
Hmm.
influential or redemptive. I'm hesitant to use the word redemptive for different reasons, but at least to have some influence on it and to be that salt and light in the world and maybe watching films and at least paying attention and I want to get into that in a minute or two, but paying attention to the message and learning to engage the underlying message of films
Hmm.
can help us do that.
I think it can. I, I for me, whether it's film, music, other forms of art, these are very key aspects of cultural expression
Mhm.
that human beings partake in. It's
Yeah,
actually part of a cultural language.
yeah, right,
And I think in order to be ministering to a culture, I think we have
yeah,
to know the cultural
right,
language. We have to
right,
be able to talk about issues through lenses that people are familiar with.
right.
I found it over the years. It's fascinating how you're able to get at the heart and core of a difficult issue with someone who's a non-believer,
Mhm.
when you start talking about movies.
Right,
And you're referencing characters that they're familiar with and
right,
struggles that the characters are exhibiting that they're
right.
familiar with. It's an actually fascinating set piece.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Act 17 approach,
It
right?
is,
So
it
we're,
is.
if people watching won't be able to see it, but you're looking straight at the Areopagus where
Mm,
Paul
mm,
preached to the people on Mars Hill. And, when Paul was going to the Jewish synagogues, he was talking about the Old Testament. He's talking
mhm.
about Christ as a fulfillment of Old Testament scriptures and so on.
Yeah.
When he goes into Athens, the headquarters of like philosophy and
Hmm.
Greek thinking, he doesn't start there, right? He
No.
actually quotes the poets that they were familiar with. And today we would say he's quoting secular literature,
Hmm.
but he's exposing a need there. And he's then using that as his springboard to say, but look at how Jesus fulfills that longing.
Hmm.
And so to me that strikes me because we're kind of getting through the back door at what I wanted to come to, which is so how if we're not going to be cultural anorexics who avoid everything in culture, and we don't want to be cultural gluttons who just consume it,
Mhm.
then the question is, how do we engage it? So
Right,
how do we, and so let's talk a little bit about that. How can Christians watch quote unquote secular movies
right,
and engage them in a way that is helpful and constructive and
right,
valuable?
right. Yeah, it's interesting you brought up Acts chapter 17. So that's the section you're talking about at the Areopagus is Acts 17 verses 16 through
Hmm.
34, and it's really fascinating that whole piece there. He actually quotes uh, a Greek philosopher and poet named Epimenides,
Yeah, right,
and quotes it back to the Stoics and Epicureans who were sitting there
right,
listening to him.
right.
And that whole passage is a real powerful piece because it's a reminder that we are to culturally engage, and in order to do that, we must have a level of understanding, and it has
Hmm.
to have some depth.
Right,
It can't be schmaltz,
right,
right?
right.
It can't be
Schmaltz
schmaltzy
is
and
too
cheesy,
simplistic, right? It
right?
doesn't usually get at the
It
nuance of a
doesn't.
person and the genuine struggle that a person may have, and so it often is lacking on. It's just very black and white.
It is, and so I think for starters, I would say one of the ways we begin is to recognize what the art is actually
Mm.
um, is recognize what the art is that we're seeing. Now, are there films? I think this is a good point to mention this. Are there films that Christians should not watch? I think there are.
Hmm.
Okay. I don't think that we should just be thinking, oh, anything and everything is free game. So if it's the most demonic horror film that's ever been made, but I want to find some way I can say I
Right,
can, well, I think that's not where we want to
right.
be.
Christians in the Reformed camp have been guilty of that, where it's
Sure,
just, well, cultural engagement, so I'll
sure.
watch, you know.
So I think we have to approach this carefully, but I think there is a middle ground. The two extremes, glutton and anorexic, those are not healthy places to live when it comes to engaging culture. And I myself have used the term um, redemptive engagement or redemptive interaction. It doesn't mean that we're responsible for
Right,
redeeming their souls,
right,
but
right,
we
right.
can serve as kind of
We can take it back from what it otherwise could be,
right.
right? I
We
mean, yeah,
can. We kind
yeah.
of reel it back in. So I think for me, one of the things I teach my students is let's always think about context. So if a film that we're if the film is using violence or depraved behavior as a display of this end goal, that's perfectly fine, right?
Hmm.
So if it's all just about gratuitous violence for violence sake, for the
Right,
sake of violence on the screen, that's not really helpful, right? That's
right,
but if the violence or the depraved actions, depraved choices, if they are serving in a context which says, look what happens
yeah,
to this individual or this group of people as they behave in these ways, what are
right,
the consequences?
right,
That is a very important set piece
right,
that where you're revealed. It's very revealing. In fact, we're reminded of what the consequences of ideas and actions can very well be.
right. So that, I mean, and that's consistent with a lot of times how we even read in scripture, right? So you read through Judges, or you read
Yeah.
through, even, you don't have to even get as far as Judges. It's right in Genesis, and you see, horrible, horrible stuff.
Mhm.
And it's sort of, again, it's a written medium, but in some ways it's still the same thing. It's giving you a glimpse into human depravity, and just and then it's sort of tracking along as you see, here's what happens when that lets go unchecked.
Right.
And that's instructive for us. I
It
mean,
is.
that is telling us the truth,
It
because
is.
I think that's the other thing, that so good art, I mean, it's well done. It should be, done in a way that's excellent, but all art tells a story. I mean,
Mhm.
it tells, it makes a case for something.
Mhm.
And then it's our job to evaluate, is that true or not?
Right.
And so, even these movies, we mentioned Road to Perdition. I think there's a lot of truth in that film. in a profound way. And it's like movie's 20 some years old. So if you haven't seen it yet, spoiler alert's kind of on you then, but it paints this picture of what happens when evil and vengeance goes unchecked, and then how do you stop it? And okay, I don't have to spoil it there, but there's where you see there's something actually that's pretty close in line with the biblical narrative of how do you put an end to evil.
Yeah.
And so that's with all the swearing, with all the shooting and the violence, it's
a
not
gangster
gratuitous.
film.
It's a gangster film. And I think the other
Capone
movie,
era gangster film.
right. The other one I always think of is Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood.
Gran Torino,
fantastic movie.
Yeah.
It gets at themes of racism, but also, vengeance and how do you stop it? And I think the interesting thing is between the two, the answer is kind of the same in both cases.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clearly pointing to something. Now, it's not explicitly trying to say, hey, trust in Jesus, he'll forgive your sins and you go to heaven. But it's saying, here's something that has to take place to put an end to that cycle of violence. And then for the Christian, we can step in and say, yeah, but that's actually that's a mirror of the greater story that's already been written. So I kind of went on there maybe, and I'm not even sure there was a question and all of that, other than just an observation.
And there would be a very long list of films in a variety of genres, right? So, I happen to really think that crime gangster films are fascinating because of some of the morality plays that are in that are obviously brought to the forefront. A film by Scorsese called The Departed from 2006 is another it's an expertly produced and written and directed and film, and the performances are off the charts with Jack Nicholson and Matt Damon and Leonardo DiCaprio. And what you're watching is a morality play unfold that is just profound. It's a profound reminder of what can happen when lies are at the center of everything. And when lies are in something like law enforcement, which is supposed to be pursuing justice, everything is compromised. There are consequences for everyone.
Right. That was Training Day too.
Another
Training
good
Day
movie
that's
Denzel Washington and Training Day is phenomenal.
Ethan Hawke.
Yeah, Ethan Hawke. Yeah, and these films, Road to Perdition would be another one. These kinds of films are very much morality plays. With Road to Perdition, the Michael Sullivan Sr. character played by Tom Hanks is, he's such a tragic character. He's such a tragic figure because he has served his mob boss, played by Paul Newman in one of his last film roles, actually. He served him faithfully and well because he felt he had to be loyal because the man took him in when he was much younger and orphaned and all the rest. And you see this fascinating interplay between the relationships between fathers and sons plays out here.
Well, and the nuance too, because again, it's easy to do the black and white thing of, well, he's the villain,
right?
But I found in watching that movie that you actually develop a lot of sympathy for this guy who's a violent criminal. But I think that's the point. It's saying that there is a backstory here, and human nature is complex at times. Yes, it's fallen. Yes, we don't make excuses or say, oh, it's okay. But we do acknowledge that human beings, even the most depraved among us, there's complexity there. There's shades, and so it helps to see that play out.
It does. And that for those who haven't watched the film, it's an R-rated film. It is certainly a crime gangster genre film, so there is violence. But if you're willing to take a shot at the film, I think you will find that it is remarkably redemptive. And the Michael Sr. character played by Tom Hanks, he knows that he has compromised himself. He's well aware that he has served a master who tells him to engage in evil action. And it bothers him. It weighs heavily on him. He's a gangster who loves his family. His family, his wife and youngest son are actually murdered in the film. And then he engages in vengeance, and even in the midst of all that, one of his biggest concerns is for his older son, Michael
Yeah.
Jr. He does not want Michael Jr. to become like
Right.
him. He does
Right.
not want Michael to go down that same path.
Right.
And it's powerfully done.
Right.
to
The
reveal
ending
that.
scene is very moving.
Mhm.
And it's, again, I hesitate how much to give away. I probably won't give away any more, but it's a very powerful scene. I understand that in the book there's even more
It's
that the
better.
book, the book goes
The film
further.
is a masterpiece. I do like the way that the graphic novel
The
ends.
graphic
It's
novel,
written by Max Allan Collins is the name of the guy. And at the end of the graphic novel, Michael Jr., when it's all done, he becomes a priest. It's revealed at the very end that he devotes himself to Christ
Yeah.
after turning away from this path.
Right.
But it's not something that is built on throughout the story.
Right.
It's just mentioned in passing that he makes a choice to move away from this
Yeah.
life of depravity and crime
Right.
and everything else.
Right. Right.
But it's actually the whole thing is dealt with very carefully and very in a very nuanced way to bring out all the challenges that human beings wrestle with.
Right.
Um, Before I forget, I just real quickly, I would say I have parents who are quite honestly always asking about violent films, including war films.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so I had a guy tell me, he's like, I don't think it's right for Christians to watch a movie like Saving Private Ryan, for instance.
Hmm.
And so what he's referencing combat films. I think there's a difference between films that happen to be set during war but are not
Right.
really
Right. Right.
focusing on the experiences of soldiers themselves. So we're talking about the combat environments that are being conveyed. And again, I think it comes back to context. It's really crucial.
Hmm.
If the war film is showing combat as if it's sort of like a video game, right? A
Hmm.
first person video game where you should be getting excited watching these people
Right.
getting mowed down by machine gun
Right.
fire. Well, that's not a helpful
Right.
orientation. But if you watch a film like Saving Private Ryan, look, Spielberg and Tom Hanks, his star in the film. That film is not about celebrating gore and violence, and it's not about celebrating weaponry that has the capacity to kill people in great numbers. There's none of that.
Right.
That entire film is about reminding the viewer of the sacrifices that were made
Yeah.
during one of the most important military campaigns in modern
Yeah.
human history. And so that context is never lost. They never lose the humanity of the characters. They're revealing the challenges and the horrors of war for a very specific purpose. And you're supposed to be if you finish that film, you're not walking out of there going, "That was so cool."
Right.
There's a depth and dimension that you've just watched that leaves you um, feeling like you've kind of been beaten up a little
Right.
bit,
And which is the intent,
which
right?
is
I
the
mean,
intent.
and there's again where movies have an effect, and movie makers, directors, writers, producers have a goal in mind. They
Right,
want to accomplish something.
right,
So, and that movie, of course, does it.
very
So,
much.
so I got one more question to ask, and then I want to do just kind of some real simple, you know, quick questions. Um, for the Christian who's let's say they're convinced, okay, they don't want to be the cultural anorexic, they don't want to be the cultural glutton,
Mhm.
they want to watch movies critically. So what are some questions or thoughts that they might have as they watch a movie that will help them to do that?
Um, Actually, I brought a list in my bag. I don't know where I put my. Oh, I'm gonna just step off
Yeah,
camera for a
right.
second. I have something that I typically hand out to my students that helps them. Saying this all off camera.
So we can edit this out
All
too, I
right.
think,
So yeah, yeah, there are some things. This is at least part of this is taken from the Brian Gottawa book that I've referenced. So here are some questions that I pose to my students pretty consistently when I advise them about film watching, and it has to do with that context, right? To be thinking, all right, does the film promote an educational approach to exposing evil? right?
Mhm.
I think that's, so it's not that you have to avoid films that deal with evil, it is how they approach
Right,
the subject of evil.
right,
So what are the context and consequences of the human vice that is being portrayed?
right.
I think that's very important.
Yep.
And here's the question that I think is most critical. Is it presented in a way that is dehumanizing or humanizing?
Is the evil presented in
Right.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
so is it, again, is it a morality play, or are you just watching something where it almost seems like the evil is being celebrated?
Yeah.
Well, that would probably not be the way to go. So one of the questions I have is the sin displayed as an end in itself,
Mm,
or is the sin part of the bigger picture that leads to some form of redemption in the
right.
film, right? So
Yeah,
there are some other
that's
questions.
great. So one of the, and this is sort of my own version. It's a little bit simpler because we watch movies with high schoolers here and sitcoms and music as well. We kind of ask three questions. We ask, is it true? Is it good?
Sure.
Is it beautiful? Those are
Mhm.
not my questions. They're like, they go back as long as like Plato
Oh,
and,
sure.
but we're asking, because that cinematography question, I think, is actually more important than maybe people realize.
Mhm.
I think it's valuable watching and appreciating stuff that is done well.
Mhm.
So, camera angle, character, or
Mhm.
lighting, music, all of that stuff. So that's the beautiful question. And then we ask, is it good? Does it do what it sets out to do?
Mhm.
If it's trying to be funny, is it funny is kind
Right.
of an important one. And then this is what you're getting at, and you fleshed this out more than I do, which is why I'm glad you brought that. Is it true? Like
Right.
which requires you asking the question, what is the version of truth that this movie is telling? Is it
Mhm.
honest about evil?
Mhm.
Is the evil celebrated? Is it sort of just presented as an end in itself? And if that's, so when you can get at that, then it's okay, well, how do you evaluate that film's message and how does it
Right.
compare with the Christian message? And
Right.
if you really wanted to keep going, then you do the Act 17 thing, which is
Right.
what is the Christian alternative to it?
Right.
And why is that better?
Right.
So
Yeah, all these are critical questions. The beauty is, I mean, for me, filmmaking as an art form, it's why the cinematographers, right, who really do their work well, what they're complementing the narrative on screen in some
right,
powerful ways
right.
with the levels of light that they're using,
Yeah.
with obviously the different camera angles. You go
Yeah.
back and you start watching films like Citizen Kane. It's one of the reasons that film geeks like me and millions of others, when we watch a film like Citizen Kane and we're looking at Bob Toland, uh, who's the cinematographer on the film, and what he constructs and brings together, it's dumbfounding. It's actually so impressive when you see how the storytelling, the narrative on screen is just matched up
Yeah.
perfectly with the ways in which low angle shots and high angle shots are being used, and the deep focus shots that Toland used
Yeah.
on the film. It's profound.
Right. And it always strikes me that if it weren't there, we would totally miss it.
Yeah, yeah,
And the fact that it's there, we might not even realize all the nuances and all the ways that they use camera angle and lighting
sure.
and all that. But take that out of it, if it's poorly done, it's like it stands out like a sore
It
thumb.
does.
If it's well done, we love the movie that much more. We might not even realize why.
Yeah, and Road to Perdition is a great
Yeah.
example. The
Yep.
first time I saw the film, I was just so engrossed in the story and
Yeah.
what was going on. But
Yep.
I mean, I watched it thinking, man, this is really well put together. I did think that. Then when I went back and watched it, a second and third time, and multiple other viewings. So Conrad Hall was the cinematographer on the film. It was his last film before his death. He
Mm,
died. He was awarded the Oscar for cinematography, but it was posthumous. He died
mm,
before the award
mm.
was given out. Um, but the low lighting at the start of the film, when the winter in the
Yeah.
Midwest is brought to the forefront, there's a
Yeah.
lot of doom and gloom that they have to wrestle with, and so it's all in that. Um,
Well, and
that's
rain too.
the
Like the
rain.
rain
Yeah,
is
well,
always
it's
just kind
just
of that. Yeah.
uh, the the ways that the art in that film is so profoundly well done. It's
Yeah.
one of the reasons I regard it as a masterpiece of the 21st century. The scene where Paul Newman, I'm sorry, this is a spoiler alert, but Michael Senior gets his vengeance on his mentor, Paul Newman, in the
Mhm.
film, because he knows that his former boss allowed Connor Rooney to go and kill his family. And so he finally catches up with Paul Newman. And there's this
Okay.
sequence where, the Tom Hanks character, Michael Sullivan, is gunning down all the bodyguards in this rainstorm.
Yeah, yeah,
And the music by Thomas Newman, by the way, is
yeah, yep,
perfect,
yep,
because you're watching this happen, and you're not hearing the machine gun fire. It's all the music, and the characters are standing there, and as the
yeah,
rain's falling down, they're falling to the ground almost like raindrops.
yeah,
And it's just, and then Michael Senior comes out of the rain,
yep,
and the darkness, like some sort of an avenging angel, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And the whole set piece is so gorgeously shot. I
yeah.
mean,
It's a
it's
powerful scene.
it is.
It's like,
So I
it's
mean,
chills. Yep,
when films are done like that, you start to get chills running down your
yep.
spine, because you understand that you're witnessing the artwork, the art
Right,
form at its
right.
very
It's
best.
among the highest form of art. Yeah, for sure.
I will give one shout out so Christian families often do want to know, well, if I'm watching a faith-based movie
Mhm.
and, fireproof isn't my thing, like if Kirk Cameron, as nice as he may be, if that's not what I want to watch, well, what's a good example of faith-based filmmaking, right?
Yeah.
And you can't go wrong with Terrence Malick.
Hmm.
And I think that the greatest faith-based film, in my estimation, the greatest faith-based film, maybe ever, is a film that he made in 2019 called A Hidden Light,
Yeah.
which portrays the struggle of an Austrian farmer named Franz Jagerstatter, who defied the Nazis, refused to fight for the Nazis, and pledge
Right.
allegiance to Adolf Hitler, and was ultimately imprisoned for that. And the costs to him and to his family were great.
Yeah.
But it's told so beautifully, and it's told so powerfully. It is a
It,
faith-based film that is
right.
working at the very highest level of art.
But there again, I mean, it is clearly faith-based, but it's not black and white, because even the people who are
That's
resisting
right.
are sort of demonized in the
They are.
village, and it's complex, and it
Hmm.
brings that out.
It
So
does.
yeah,
So I mean, there's a long list. Silence by Scorsese would be another
yeah.
one. I love Ben-Hur. It's one of the greats.
Well, so that was going to be my last question, just kind of a few popcorn style questions, one word or one sentence answers. So your favorite film of all time?
Oh, my favorite film of all time in the
Yeah.
English language would be Casablanca.
Okay. How about non-English language then?
Non-English language would be Seven Samurai by Kurosawa.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it's an out and out masterpiece.
Okay. I have not seen that one. In fact, Casablanca is on my list of films I have to watch. I haven't seen that one yet either. So
It's a perfect
yeah.
blend of storytelling and acting precision on the part of Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman,
Yeah.
Claude Rains, Paul
Okay.
Henreid. It's just off the charts.
So we'll finish where we started. It's Oscar in the next couple weeks. I forget when they go out, a couple weeks.
Mhm.
Um, which of the movies, let's just stick with Best Picture nominated films, just to
Mhm.
keep it simple. Have you seen? I'm assuming you've seen probably all of them, if not
I've
all,
seen a
like
I've seen a
most of
bunch of
them.
them. I have yet to see Barbie.
Okay.
I probably will watch it.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it yet.
It's
But
not as bad as you fear it is, and it's not as good as
mm,
people think it is.
no, I mean, Greta Gerwig is a talented director, and she loads that film with talented
Yeah.
actors. I think there is a real satirical wit. I would expect there to be some satirical wit in that film.
Yeah.
That's what she's known
I
for
think
as a
that's fair to
director.
say. Yep.
So it's probably worth watching. I'm not sure I'll love it, but
Yeah. Which one did you love this year?
I thought Oppenheimer was
Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
part of that is because I have deep respect for what Christopher Nolan and his cinematographer in the film is Hoyt van Hoytema. What a fantastic name! And they when they team up, they just put together fascinating
Yeah.
work. The narrative on screen is really well put together. The acting in the film, Cillian Murphy is
Yeah.
just phenomenal
Yeah.
as Oppenheimer himself, and it's dealing with a very complex topic.
Right.
I might have, if as a historian, right, I might have preferred a little bit more context thrown in here and there.
Sure.
There were some serious questions about Oppenheimer's um, socialist, communist leanings
Yeah. Right.
that
Right.
I think they could have explored a little bit more. But you also have to make the film move along. You
Yeah.
have to keep it
It was already
entertaining.
like 3 hours as it
And
was, or
it
two and a
was,
half,
yeah,
3 hours.
closing in quickly on three
Yeah.
hours.
So
So I just think it's extremely well put
yeah,
together,
it was a good one.
fascinating piece. I think my close second is a film that many that's getting um, a little bit more attention now, with Paul Giamatti in the title role,
Holdovers.
The
That was
Holdovers.
a really well done
And
movie.
and
Yeah.
I think now that I don't think the film necessarily deserves Best Picture
Right.
status.
I would agree.
I think it could be on. It's nominated, I believe,
It is.
for that, but I don't
Yeah.
think it will win, nor should it win.
No.
It's really well done, but his performance in that film,
I
in my opinion, deserves the Best
I
Actor
thought so too.
Oscar.
I,
So
for me, when I watched that one, it was one of those, I hadn't even heard of it, which is not, maybe that speaks more of my naivete than anything. But then I went and watched, I was like, this is a really excellent
it's
movie.
really excellent.
Giamatti is subtle, but he's funny in
Oh
it,
God,
and the acting
yeah.
and the storyline was unique, I thought, and
Mhm.
so it was kind of a fun one to watch. So yeah, I agree. I don't think it's going to beat like Oppenheimer. I
No,
actually almost wonder if Barbie, just for other reasons, but maybe more political or social agenda,
yeah,
or,
we'll see. We'll
who knows?
see. I mean,
But I mean, Oppenheimer, I think, is probably going to win it. But anyway, that's just my prediction.
yeah,
But
we'll see.
Holdovers to me was that was kind of the dark horse that I thought, yeah, that was a fun one. So
It's one of my favorite films of the past probably 10, 15 years. And
yeah,
so I say this, I suppose viewers watching this will wonder, I'm going on probably somewhere around 1,750 films in my lifetime, that I've watched, and I have kept something of a film diary over the
yeah.
long years, so I can, kind of tap into, what I was thinking when I first saw it. So when I have films that I think are great, these
Uh-huh.
are films that are in like film Valhalla for me. Understand that like a top 10 or 20, like for me, if it's in my top 100 list or top 150, it's a phenomenal
Right,
film,
right,
right?
right, right.
So when you watch that many movies, you begin to, and in that number, I will tell you, I've seen some awesome movies, I've seen some pretty good ones, and I've seen a lot of crummy
All
ones.
right, so let's end on a bad note then. What is the worst movie that you've ever seen that stands right out as like, that's an awful movie?
For me, it would probably be probably be Battlefield Earth from 2000, starring John Travolta. Which was just so abysmal. I remember thinking of getting up and just walking out. It was so bad. And Roger Ebert, the late great Roger Ebert, said this film is so bad it's going to be the punchline of jokes about bad movies
Yeah,
till the
yeah,
end of
yeah.
time. He's like there's a point in the film when there's this attack, and a whole bunch of the home world on this sci-fi planet that's on screen is blown apart, blown to smithereens, and Ebert's comment was, if the entire film had in fact been blown up, it probably would have gotten a standing ovation in the theater. It was that bad. It's one of the most brutal films to sit through.
Well,
So
the thing is that sometimes those really bad movies become the ones that are really good because they're so
that you
bad.
can laugh at them.
Yeah,
I don't know. I can't even laugh at it. I never. Those are 2 hours I never can
you
get
don't get
back.
those back.
And yeah,
Well, listen, this has been a lot of fun.
yeah,
Thanks for
yeah. It's fun.
sitting in and taking the time and engaging this. I do think it's an important question that we
Yeah.
ask as Christians, and so yeah, thank you. And hey, we'll do it
Pleasure.
again sometime. Thanks, Scott.
Pleasure. Thanks, bud.